interest is first and foremost in Rank as a holistic thinker, one who ventures beyond reductionism, mechanism, and classical notions of causality in his understanding of personhood. His transitional and post-Freudian era are therefore in the foreground. As Will Wadlington has pointed out, Rank did not leave behind case studies in the sense that Freud did. So therefore we learn about his approach apart from through his philosophical and theoretical texts from various sources, including from his lectures, where Psychology of Difference, edited by Robert Kramer, is an excellent source of knowledge. And we learn about Rank through people that knew him, such as the trailblazing writer Anais Nin, who was his client, his friend, and his collaborator. We learn via the American philosopher, social worker, and school manager Jesse Taft, who again was a client, and subsequently his translator, biographer, and as Kirk Schneider has emphasized, a major supporter and benefactor of Rank's work at a time when he was expelled from the psychoanalytical community and had few allies. Further, we learn about Rank by inquiring into literature that inspired him, and by considering his philosophy and approach in a wider context of meaning, which I will do here today, in as much as I'm able to within the time frame. I think it might be an opportune time in the history of ideas about human reality and psychotherapeutic practice to engage in the way that we are this weekend with the existential psychodynamic psychology of Otto Rank, because I believe in research and in practice, we are becoming more process-oriented, and we move, albeit slowly, towards integrative approaches to mental health and well-being. So I'm drawing on the research from my current dissertation here today, in which I elaborate on the part-whole relation through the thought of Otto Rank and theoretical physicist and philosopher David Bohm. So because this material is research-based, it tends to be a bit abstract, and a few more steps might be needed before we can apply what I'm saying here today to the therapeutic situation. But certainly my aim is, with my study, to contribute with knowledge which can be used for development of practice. Beyond is a word that is closely associated with Otto Rank. He sets out beyond transference, and as he put it, beyond the repletion of the Oedipus situation, beyond psychoanalysis, and finally beyond psychology altogether in his last publication, which can be understood as an ultimate rejection of the positivistic epistemological framework guiding traditional mainstream psychology. Further, there is the beyond good and evil in Nietzsche, one of Rank's greatest sources of inspiration, beyond the pleasure principle in Freud, and there is beyond in scholars who have dealt with Rank in various ways, as in Stanislav Grof's book titled Beyond the Brain, and Sharon Spencer's text Beyond Therapy, which deals with Nin's and Rank's relation. However, while the word beyond implies on the other side of, from the farther side, out of reach, to transcend or to pass someone's comprehension and so forth, I conceive of the beyond in Rank not as something far off, but quite the opposite, as something integrated. If we consider him a mystic in the vein of Heinz Kohut or Michael Eigen, as far as the psychoanalytical tradition goes, he is, as Stern Merker have argued, closer to an extrovertive mysticism that perceives unity throughout physical reality than one limited to isolated spirituality or exalted moments of awe. Further, creativity is at center of his cosmic conception, argues Merker, in the application of mystical or cosmic consciousness to the tangible components of art, artifacts, or culture in general. We can consider Martin Buber's thoughts, as Buber exerted influence on Rank and his deeply relational psychology. According to Buber, in order for something to enter into relation, that is, to exist beyond something, it must first be set at a distance. One can enter into relation only with that which has become an independent opposite. All things arise from opposing forces, which are more or less related, a concept also known as the coincidentia oppositorum, postulated by 15th century German thinker Nicholas of Cusa. This twofold principle, as Buber calls it, can in the first instance not be established intrapsychically in the human's inner life, but in the great phenomena of its connection with an otherness, which is constituted as otherness by the event of distancing. Nature, or external reality, offers us this act of contrasting, but we find the same principles of spaces, edges, or paradoxes, and ultimately folded meanings in Eros, for instance, revealed in the following sentence by Canadian poet and classicist Anne Carson. A space must be obtained where desire ends. Rank recognized that our existence is constituted on an axis of paradox, and he especially affirms how all creativity is driven by a tension between opposites, which, as Ian McGilchrist points out, applies to scientific inquiry as well. With Rank's concept of the dual fears of living, he explains that we cannot have life without a fear of separation and individuation, for as Rank contends, the consequence of individualization, of self-becoming, is the fear of being alone, of loneliness, the loss of the feeling with kinship with the all, with others. At the other side of it, the fear of death, he says, shall be understood as the fear of unity, of dissolution, which then means that in a certain sense, connection comes at the price of the loss of individuality. From this follows that we cannot have creation without sacrifice. And we witness this in Socrates, for example, who chose to die for his ideas in a literal sense. We see it in Anais Nin, who stated in the conclusion of her first published diary, "Psychoanalysis did save me because it allowed the birth of the real me, a most dangerous and painful one for a woman, filled with dangers, for no one has ever loved an adventurous woman as much as they have loved adventurous men. The birth of the real me might have ended like that of my unborn child." Nin refers to delivering a stillborn child earlier. Lastly, we see it in Rank's own life story. Rank, like the great Nietzsche, was ahead of his time. He went like Nietzsche beyond his early influences and beyond his own early work. And like Nietzsche, attempted self-creation in the face of inevitable death. His partial immortality, through the legacy he leaves behind, or left behind, cost him his relationship to Freud around the publication of The Trauma of Birth. Rank having no real relation to his father, Freud was not only a mentor, a colleague, rather for Rank, in Taft's words, the deepest relationship of his life was with Freud, to whom, as his first ego ideal, he yielded himself with a completeness never to be risked again. So at the one side of things, Rank applied his own philosophy as a way of life. He shared early Nietzsche's belief that creativity is a powerful means by which the human can venture beyond the given and give meaning to life. At the other side of things, he did not escape the existential conundrum of living. Rank wrote to Nin from Philadelphia, "You are great in life as I am in creation. You lived my creations. And in that sense, you are greater, and your philosophy of living is true. It is the one I arrived at on paper. And because you are rare in living, your writing is not only rare, a unique document, but it is great." To sum up Rank's central theme, I would say that it involves the separation and synthesis of dualities, the ever-moving, partly indeterminate here and now, the lifelong process of integration through creation, in the light of which the existential question of self-being versus self-becoming partly is resolved, in that In the vein of Heraclitus, being is becoming. So how do all these paradoxes and dualities link up? The root to the part-whole problem is to be found in the self-cosmic relation, which Rank deals with in Trauma of Birth, written in the same year as Buber's I and Thou. In the Trauma of Birth, Rank redefines the question of human reality in existential terms of wholeness, rather than primarily Oedipal terms like Freud. Firstly, as we have seen, he recognizes the mother as the first so-called object relation, as opposed to the father. Rank further puts forth the idea that birth, also understood metaphorically, is the first separation a person experiences in their life. And he elaborates on this by going back to the self-cosmos relation. By this separation from cosmos that birth too entails, a person exchanges, as Martin Buber puts it, their intrinsic connection to the universe for the possibilities of a relational one. This thesis has far-reaching implications because it links ultimately mental life to material life through what Rank recognizes as preconceptual, embodied, unconscious or tacit process. A region of the psychophysical. Robert Kramer has an interesting essay about this titled Discovering the Existential Unconscious. In philosophical terms, this formulation further supports the notion that Rank follows Arthur Schopenhauer's position on Immanuel Kant, where the noumena-phenomena distinction is concerned. In Critique of Pure Reason, the idea that the world we see is not the world as it truly is captures Kant's perspective on knowledge. Between how things seem and how they are in themselves, there is an epistemic divide. We can never know the world beyond appearances for this reason, Kant argues. The absolute is always beyond our reach. But Kant's speculative thought recognizes the world of phenomena as its boundary and ends there, admitting that it cannot know the thing in itself. Schopenhauer agreed with Kant that there is a noumena-phenomena distinction, but proposed that there is a single undivided whole, which he called the will. Rank contended that the individual is the temporal representative of the cosmic primal force, while willing is the voluntary and conscious creating of one's own fate. This is significant because that we are at once masters of our own fate and self-cosmic, self-other relational creatures does not only in a microcosmic sense entail a complexity which we humans always have struggled to relate to. It also indicates that Rank is somewhere in his understanding, I argue, between indeterminacy and determinacy, which, as Bohm explains, can be understood as complementary of one another. Since the days of Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, and Descartes, reductionistic, dualistic worldviews and linear notions of causality have dominated science, and mainstream psychology therewith. These can be understood as non-holistic orientations. The reductionistic order is an insufficient scientific view, as behind phenomena and simple events is a continuous, astounding creative process in which the human participates. While the whole of this process, as David Bohm makes clear, is always reflecting into all its parts and aspects, the reverse is not true, namely that from mechanically separating and reuniting the parts, we have a discernible whole. Bohm locates the root cause of mechanistic and dualistic approaches in what he calls fragmentary thought, contending essentially that thought fragments wholeness. He says, the notion that all these fragments are separately existent is evidently an illusion. And this illusion cannot do other than lead to endless conflict and confusion. Indeed, the attempt to live according with the notion that the fragments really are separate is, in essence, what has led to the growing series of extremely urgent crises that is confronting us today. Rank, during a lecture in the United States in 1930, clearly rejects an objective reductive approach, stating that the scientific side to human behavior and personality problems is not only insufficient, but leaves out the most essential part, namely the human side. The characteristic of which is that it just can't be measured and checked and controlled. And yet, it is the only vital factor, not only in life, but in all kinds of therapy. Rank refers to the distance from empirical testability of factors such as will, consciousness, awareness, and experience, aspects of self, therapy, and relation, which become all the more important during his years of working independently from Freud. Freud attempted to observe the will objectively, despite the fact that what might be obtained from phenomena are representations. As Lieberman pointed out, his attempts to establish psychoanalysis as a respectable field of scientific study are indicative of this. William James, who Rank studied, on a similar note to Rank, maintained that while psychology, due to its purposes, is committed to deal with the general laws, and therefore pragmatically might assume that determinism and causal order are plausible structures of reality, the uniquely human cannot be understood within the positivistic framework. Like Rank, he suggested that the question of free will cannot be determined, again, with empirical evidence, and therefore must be dealt with elsewhere, that is, metaphysically. As in Rank, this is not to be taken for a subordinate category. Rather, the objective model of procedure is limited in terms of purpose and use, being, as James put it, enveloped in a wider order on which science, has no claims at all. In Psychology and the Soul, Rank investigates again the integrative theme of the trauma of birth, albeit from a different angle, arguing that human existence ought to be approached at the interface of physics and psychology. He sees links between assumptions derived from quantum mechanics and his own relativity psychology, which has no fixed standpoint, he contends, but only a momentarily given relationship between the experimenter and the person studied, whose closeness varies dynamically at all times. We derive from Rank's contribution and from an additional line of research and clinical practice since in the field of psychological science that apply to the microcosmos of human reality, to mind-body-brain relations, and to the close parallels between person, other, and world. Mechanistic, dualistic, and linear approaches to causality are particularly inadequate in terms of understanding the more complex qualities of existence. These include observer-dependent aspects of experience and consciousness, which pertain to the concept of material existence as more subjectively felt than objectively conceived. These dynamics of experience apply neither to what we, using Rank's terminology, can call objective psychology nor subjective psychology. Rather, and importantly, they go beyond subject-object division and refer to a realm between. These intermediate orders, which Rank called unio mystica, which Carl Jung at times referred to as unus mundus, and studied, for example, in the form of numbers, have, as Bohm maintained, been understudied so far, but where I suggest that his implicate order might be useful. But we don't have time to go into that now. Contemporary research on the area include Mark Tarlow's use of fractals to suggest a fractal epistemology in the attempt to explain underlying structures of reality in ways which go beyond this subject-object division without excluding one or another aspect. So far, Western philosophy and psychology have tended to either favor a reductive position, where only phenomena, relations, and processes that are quantifiable and applicable to an experimental model of procedure are real and have objective validity. This is what Rank criticizes as the deterministic and materialistic position in Freud. And at the other side of the spectrum, psychology has, in an anti-materialistic trend, accepted only the subjective, the knowledge of the phenomena as opposed to the noumena in Kant, at the expense of eternal reality, which, as Terry Marks Tarlow and David Shapiro have argued, restricts clinical attention solidly to the intersubjective matrix of transference countertransference dynamics. Rank criticized and eventually moved beyond also possible intrapsychic focus in Freud in this way, and for its model of reviving and revolving in infantile trauma. And he moved towards relational therapy, as we have seen.
About 5 minutes, Sarah. About 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. But the fragmentary approach, however, hides a deeper problem, where the relation between inner and outer, person and cosmos, body and mind, observer and observed, is concerned, and which long has been a key focus of Western philosophy and indirectly psychology. This problem stems predominantly from the fact that the nature of these polarities are so different that no apparent relationship between them is discernible. This separation is clearly postulated in Descartes' philosophy, where he argued that the concept of the body involves nothing that belongs to mind, and nothing of that in mind is part of the body. Yet, as Bohm notes, and as Rank clearly postulated, sharing with Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche a strong interest in the relationship between body and mental life, experience shows that they are closely related. Which brings us back to the idea of wholeness. While all things rise from apparent opposites, as we perceive them in left brain hemisphere manner, as Ian McGilchrist has noted, contraria sunt complementa, Niels Bohr pointed out, meaning contraries fulfill one another and constitute a whole. We can think of the north and the south poles of a battery, the positive and negative of an electricity circuit, and the embodied and the disembodied, of yin and yang, and temporal and eternal. We cannot have one without the other, for as Goethe saw and as Rank truly affirms, they are present simultaneously in one another. I essentially argue that even though the concept of wholeness is subtle in Rank's theoretical framework, it runs as a theme throughout. I hope I have been able to point to some of the ways in which Rank ventured beyond, and perhaps not only into the farther reaches of human nature, but towards wholeness, which in a sense also is right here and now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. All right.